Hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Good evening and welcome to the Mark Steyn Show, which would tend to suggest, in the absence of anybody else in the studio, that I am Mark Steyn. Tonight, the Great Migrations 2022 edition are already underway. Also, China, as Donald J. Trump likes to say, China. Is there anything it doesn't already own? And after today's American courtroom hearing, is it lose-lose for His Royal Highness the Duke of York? And of course, the most important part of the show, your questions, comments on what we're covering and anything else. If we do Stump the Steyn toward the end, you can email me, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. All that coming up. But first, as always, the news with Polly.
Mark, thank you. Good evening. I'm Polly Middlehurst with your latest news headlines. The Prime Minister today has said over 60% of people in intensive care with COVID are unvaccinated. During a Downing Street briefing earlier, Boris Johnson also confirmed the government will roll out daily COVID testing for 100,000 critical workers. This comes as today's reported cases of COVID have exceeded 200,000 for the first time. Despite the high case numbers, Boris Johnson has not announced any new restrictions.
Anyone who thinks our battle with COVID is over, I'm afraid, is profoundly wrong. This is a moment for the utmost caution. Together with the Plan B measures that we introduced before Christmas, we have a chance to ride out this Omicron wave without shutting down our country once again. We can keep our schools and our businesses open, and we can find a way to live with this virus.
Well, away from COVID now, and more than 70 migrants have made it across the English Channel to the UK in the first crossings of the year. Border Force and the Dover lifeboat intercepted a small number of boats in the Channel, despite fairly rough conditions today. It follows new figures that show the number of people making the dangerous trip trebled last year. There were more than 28,000 illegal crossings in 2021. Politics now, and Sir Keir Starmer has insisted Labour is a patriotic party. And he said if voted into government, he'd write a new chapter of its history. Speaking to local politicians in Birmingham, the Labour leader said he offered a new contract with the British people based on the principles of security, prosperity and respect. He also said his party would create 100,000 new start-up businesses and hubs of excellence. In New York, the judge ruling over the civil sex lawsuit against the Duke of York has told the court he will make a decision very soon on whether or not to dismiss the case. Virginia Giuffre is suing Prince Andrew for alleged sexual assault when she was a teenager 2 decades ago. The Duke's legal team deny all the allegations. Yesterday, a document was made public revealing the terms of a $500,000 settlement with the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and Miss Giuffre, which prevented her from speaking publicly. Tennis, and Novak Djokovic will play at the Australian Open after being granted a medical exemption from being vaccinated against COVID. Tournament bosses confirmed earlier the Serbian will defend his title, even though being vaccinated is a requirement to play in Melbourne. The reason for the exemption being granted will remain private, according to the tournament director Craig Tiley. The Australian Open due to begin later on this month. You're up to date. I'm back in an hour. Now here's Mark.
Well, as Polly was saying, 2021 was a record-breaking year in terms of the migrants arriving on England's southern shores, 3 times as any previous year, and likely to be a new record before we get to the end of 2022. You don't see this story many other places apart from GB News, as Nigel is always saying. That's very simply because one party is open borders. That's the Labour Party. You saw Keir Starmer earlier today doing that American thing where he's got 15 flags behind him to show how patriotic he is. He's now referring to himself as leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition, which Jeremy Corbyn never did. He loves the flag, he loves the Queen, but he's in favour of open borders. And he's calculated that that's politically viable because the other party, the government party, Boris Johnson's Tories, simply don't want to talk about this at all. And so on it goes every day. Ships, not ships, but actually very flimsy vessels of migrants arriving on England's southern coast. Mark White has covered this in more detail than anybody, and he joins us now. What do you basically should be, I think as you said earlier today, should be given the freedom of the city of Dover. You should be made Duke of Dover. You spend so much time there. What are you seeing down there, Mark?
Certainly need to buy a flat here. I think it would save me in the hotel expenses. But yeah, today I think a significant day, Mark, because we had the first crossings of 2022, and I think this is an indication of where we're headed in the year ahead. It's going to be another year of very significant small boat activity in the Channel, because today there was really only a window of a few hours where the weather was just about calm enough for these boats to be pushed off from the beaches around Dunkirk, and the people smugglers took advantage of that and did exactly that and managed to get a few boats into the Channel to be inevitably picked up by UK authorities. I was at Dover Harbour a little earlier. I saw the Dover lifeboat arriving with some 35 migrants on board that particular lifeboat, and then a few hours later the Border Force vessel Hurricane arrived with 36 migrants on board, so 71 that I saw. We don't know if there were any others that we might have missed, but the weather window that was only a few hours quickly closed in. It's absolutely freezing now. I have to say there's a northerly wind blowing down here in Dover. Out in the Channel it's pretty horrific, and there are squally showers in there, so anybody out there would be struggling big time. We don't think there are any other small boats out there this evening, Mark, but you just never know with the people smugglers.
Now you rightly refer to the people smugglers. Are the, when you and I spoke a couple of weeks ago, you brought us a big story about some ne'er-do-wells from the Baltic states who'd been picked up in the North Sea, and it was a very interesting story because people smuggling is a huge business. I believe it's worth 4 billion euros in European Union countries, and yet we never seem to hear anything about the people smugglers on the southern coast. Are they taken into any kind of custody, or are they not on these vessels?
Well, I mean, the people smugglers, many of them are, of course, on the other side of the Channel. There are organised gangs on this side of the Channel that are helping facilitate that trade as well. But it is, as you say, it's very lucrative. And whatever the government says about the Borders and Immigration Bill handing down a potential maximum of life in prison for people smugglers, it's not going to be much of a disincentive for those people smugglers when they are making, on good weeks, many millions of euros, because they're charging at least 5,000 euros a head for those that are getting onto the boats, and they're packing even more, Mark, on the boats now. It's up to 60 on some of these vessels now, the slightly bigger ones, but they're just as flimsy, and in fact it was one of those bigger but more flimsy vessel that sank in November of last year with the loss of 27 lives. But the people smugglers, you were asking about the efforts to try and tackle them. Well, the government have made arrests. They certainly have done that, but not a significant number. The National Crime Agency, in conjunction with colleagues in France, have made in recent years a few hundred arrests. But many of these people are not actually the kingpins, the organisers. No. They are usually migrants, those that want to come across here that don't have the money for the boat trip, that are effectively put in charge of steering that vessel. They're put behind at the rear of the stern of the small boat, put in charge of the engine and told, go in that direction and keep going. And that's what they do. And then, of course, they're picked up and then they're prosecuted as a people smuggler. Really, they're one of the migrants who've just been put in charge of the steering because they couldn't afford the bill.
So every so often, the British authorities will catch a minnow, I guess. I should have emphasised, by the way, when I said 4 billion, that was calculated a couple of years ago to be the annual profit from people smuggling into the EU. If you look demographically at the population explosion that's gone on in Africa in the last 30 years or so, and is calculated by the UN to go on into the middle of this century, it's going to be a very lucrative business. Is the government not worried, are governments in general not worried that these human smuggling cartels are going to be as powerful as the Latin American drug cartels became in the 1980s?
I think in truth, Mark, they are absolutely very worried about this. It is a growing phenomenon, and it is a fast growing phenomenon in terms of the way that it's operating now in and around Europe. The people smugglers are highly organised now. We've seen the way in which the model has adapted in the small boat crossings, which, initially, to begin with, a couple of years ago, it was a few hundred. Then in 2019, it was a few thousand. Last year, it was 8,400. The year before, 2020, it was 8,400. And then last year, of course, 28,395. It's growing all the time. The boats are growing. Right. They're getting them custom built. They're getting materials from China, and they're getting them assembled in Turkey and then transported to right up through to France, to northwestern France, where they're then blown up with air, and then of course the taken to the beaches. The people are put on them. They're sent across the channel. But it's not just the small boats, Mark. Our focus has been on the small boats, but I can tell you it's still going on with the lorries, the clandestines, as the Home Office refers to them, those that smuggle themselves in the back of the lorries. Just last night, the French police had to remove tree branches and things like that were put around the roads in Calais because, while migrants aren't getting across on the boats, what they're doing is re-engaging with this effort to get on the backs of lorries. So they stop it with the likes of tree branches, a lorry, and then when the lorry stopped, they all scramble in the back of the lorry. So it's still going on in the lorries as well as on the boats.
Well, stay on this story, Mark, because a lot of the other media aren't doing anything about it. And, as I said, that $4 billion, 4 billion euros, think about $5 billion in profit each year is enough to expand your operations. And wouldn't you know it, it's China that is actually building these boats. I want to turn now to former Border Patrol officer Chris Hobbs. Chris, the politics of it in crude terms seems to be that one party, in fact, all the opposition parties, are not in the least bit interested in this. They want an express check-in. They think it's a humanitarian issue, and all these people should shouldn't be coming in on flimsy little vessels, but we should actually be expediting their express check-in to the United Kingdom. And then the governing party, even though it would seem to work quite well in their favour, this issue, don't actually want to say or do anything about it. Why do you think, when it comes to policy, there's a kind of paralysis at the highest level of government here?
Yeah, I mean, if I can briefly correct you, I'm an ex-police officer that worked extensively at borders. So obviously I've got a lot of friends in the border force in my time there. I think the government really want to do something about it. I think if you look at Priti Patel, some of her statements recently, she has made...
Oh, we've dropped. Chris seems to have fallen out. That big black hole you see is where Chris used to be. I don't know whether that's significant or not. He was about to give us the real scoop on that. Let me just expand on that. We'll get Chris back when we get him. But the politics of this isn't hard to figure out. Polls show not overwhelming support for action to stop this among Conservative voters, but significant numbers of Labour voters want no part of this either. You know, right now... Oh, Chris is back here. Yeah, Chris, sorry, we lost you for a moment there. You were about to correct me on something I'd said about the Border Patrol or something. So we didn't cut you off for that reason. So...
Maybe someone's listening.
So carry on with... Yeah, it wasn't me. So carry on with what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, Priti Patel is making a number of proposals in this new immigration bill. The Home Office, generally speaking, in terms of migration, not just the people coming across by boats, but generally is in a hell of a mess. The numbers of people coming in here illegally, well, they come in legally, but simply don't go back. And that's being estimated.
Right. Oh, we've lost him again. But that actually was a good point, that as foreigners will know, when you land at Heathrow, according to which particular category of person you fall into, then you are given leave to stay in the United Kingdom for a certain amount of time. And of course, once you've been lawfully admitted, the easiest thing, if you don't want to go back, is not to go back. And the chances are that no one's going to do anything about it. As I was saying before Chris came back, the politics of this for the Tories ought to be obvious. That Tory voters, particularly in the so-called red wall areas, this is one of those issues. The same thing with Donald Trump in 2015. It's why he won states that no Republican had won in decades, because people do not... citizenship is at the heart of national identity. Allegiance is at the heart of national identity. So if you have open borders, you mock citizenship. You mock the essence of what it is to be English, Scottish, Welsh, Irish, whatever. There's no point to it if anyone can just walk ashore and be living in the Holiday Inn. So people want action, and they want real action, and they don't want cynical action where people will cobble together a bill and run it through Parliament, knowing that the first time it comes up before some judge or some tribunal, that all the meaningful aspects of it will be taken out. This is one of those questions that if Boris wants to hold on to that red wall, and I don't think he's likely to, right now the Labour Party is 16 points ahead, he's got to do something about. And as I said, that is very... If you want to just have a look at this, I saw this just before I went on air. It's not the most sophisticated way of doing it, but that line soaring up into the stratosphere is the UN projection for African population increase. The flatlined line is European population. African, sub-Saharan African used to be a lot lower than Europe's population. It caught up in 2005. That's not that long ago. If you like Westlife, Arctic Monkeys, whoever it was back then, that's 2005. It caught up. And since then, it has soared up into the stratosphere. That's countries that can't support 20 million people, like Niger, are going to be expected to support 200 million people. So there's an endless supply of a human traffic for these human smugglers that the lethargy of Boris Johnson and his ministry have incentivized. These human smugglers have got all the inventory they need and then some. And they've got making 4 billion euros in profit, and that enables them to get these fancy boats made in China. It's disgraceful, his inaction, and we need to have proper action on it, not just pseudo policies. Okay, we'll be back in a moment with your comments on that. That's GB Views at gbnews.uk, and the court hearing that might have Prince Andrew sweating, or maybe not, come to think of it, because he doesn't do that. That's all coming right up. Don't touch that dial.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Things have turned a bit colder, and tomorrow will feel certainly chilly, but with a bit more sunshine and with lighter winds. Probably won't feel quite as cold as it did today. Quite quickly tomorrow evening, however, we're going to see a frost returning. Follow the isobars. They point all the way up to the north, which is where our air is coming from. The isobars still pretty close together across the northeast, but a very, very windy day here. And still those winds continue to bring wintry showers across the northeast throughout the night. So there is the potential for snow showers and a continued risk of ice across the northeast, but it could also be icy across parts of Wales and Northern Ireland, with showers coming in here and temperatures dropping close to freezing. Most towns and cities just about staying above zero, but certainly rural areas there will be a frost. But actually for most it'll be a fine, bright, cold start to Wednesday. Still some showers for Northern Ireland and Wales, some snow on the hills, but they should fade away. And the showers also fading from the far northeast. Still a cold wind blowing along these North Sea coasts, but for most the wind's a lot lighter during tomorrow, and with largely sunny skies. Temperatures still a touch below average, but as I said, probably feeling a bit more pleasant than today. Quite quickly though, look at the blue taking hold of the map. This is tomorrow evening. Quite quickly a frost forming, temperatures dropping with those light winds and clear skies. So it's going to be a very cold start to Thursday. Towns and cities likely to be -1, -2. Rural areas -5, -6, maybe -10, where there's snow lying on the mountains of Scotland. Now it will slowly turn milder across Northern Ireland as wet weather comes in here. Mostly rain, but some snow on the hills. And we'll see that then working into Wales, Northern England, Scotland. Rain at low levels, but some snow on the higher routes here for a time on Thursday. Further south, it'll be all rain as things eventually turn milder, but another cold day across the east, and again turning frosty with the potential for some ice on Thursday night.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hey, welcome back to the Mark Steyn Show on GB News. Let's check the inbox and see what you make of our first story. A Twitter user, that's all I know about him, says plenty of empty houses in the UK. Give the landlords market price and house the refugees. So what you want to do is not just put them up at the Holiday Inn. And if you're staying in a Holiday Inn, it feels kind of, temporary, even if when you're ordering up from room service. You want to actually give refugees free houses, or maybe just free flats. And once that gets out on the cell phones of the world, how many of the planet's 7.5 billion people do you think are going to come here and take advantage of that? That's a genius suggestion. Another Twitter user says, disgusting that Border Force and the Royal National Lifeboat Institute went out to the French waters and waited like a taxi for them to be delivered onto their boats just in the British side. Yeah, we go on about these flimsy vessels, but it's rather like the Mediterranean now, where the flimsy vessel sets out from the Libyan ports and it goes, just sort of halfway, a little way out from the beach, just a little ways out there. It's maybe if you were standing up in water, it'd be like 5.5 foot, so your head would be poking out the top. And then the great humanitarian intervention comes and ferries them the rest of the way. And that's not why people give money to the Royal National Lifeboat Institute, which have done splendid work for 2 centuries all around the UK and Ireland for boats that are in distress. They are not meant to be part of what I emphasize is a criminal people smuggling operation. It's a criminal operation, and there is no reason why donors to the RNLI should be donating to an RNLI that wants to make it easier for the criminals. Susan says, not impressed and less impressed with Boris Johnson and his government. He needs to go. Pendulums swing, even for the big superstars of politics, as Mrs. Thatcher and Tony Blair can both tell you. But in those particular cases, their successors did not disturb, for the most part, the achievements of Mrs. Thatcher and Blair. We have now had Conservative prime ministers for 11 years. And what have we got to show for it? The pendulum is about to swing, and unlike Thatcher and unlike Blair, they will not have used, for whatever one thinks of either, they will not have used their terms in office. Gary says, disgusted but not surprised. Yeah, the difficulty is finding a political way to channel the disgust. And Salim, a Syrian migrant staying on the border of Turkey, says, I am Salim from Syria. I have 2 kids. I live with my family in a camp near the Turkish border. We need help to get some basic needs. The best thing for the world, Syria, Salim, Syria is a country that could be a great country. There's no reason for it to have collapsed in the way it did, except for the fact that it has a bloody, brutal dictatorship, and it had various competing factions that were not up to overthrowing him. And in the end, I understand that you have to think about your life and everything, but in the end, the dysfunctional parts of the world cannot simply export their populations to the more or less functioning parts of the world, which the United Kingdom just about falls into. Thank you for that. Keep them coming. GBviews at gbnews.uk and via Twitter at GBnews. A New York judge is set to decide very soon, he says, whether to dismiss Virginia Giuffre's allegations of sexual assault against the Duke of York. As I said yesterday, I have no time for either Prince Andrew or the dirty, rotten, stinking, corrupt American justice system, so I don't really have a dog in this fight, but I did listen to what the court hearing had to offer today, and someone who knows what it all means is one of the sharpest of legal commentators, Joshua Rosenberg QC. Joshua, two questions, I guess, really. I've read what you make of the agreement and your interpretation of it, because it's not really like something you'd expect to find in any other common law court. It's a particular American perversion of these things, I think. What do you make of that agreement, and what do you make of the way the Duke of York's lawyers carried on in court today?
I think the Duke of York's lawyers were perfectly entitled to refer to that agreement on his behalf. It's their duty to put forward all arguments they properly can, and they took the view that this agreement exempted Prince Andrew from the claim by Virginia Giuffre and meant that she couldn't sue because she had promised that she wouldn't sue people who could take advantage of the agreement. That was what he said anyway.
But there was also a lot of talk as to what you mentioned, I think, on air yesterday, this extraordinary comprehensive thing. This agreement shall apply from the beginning of the world to the date of signature, which would seem to be all-encompassing. But the lawyers today and the judge as well seem to think that, as always with these motions, a lot of it was all pretty loosey-goosey, and it was actually harder to determine its scope than that sentence would appear to mean.
That's right. Judge Lewis Kaplan raised two objections to the arguments being put by Prince Andrew's lawyer, Andrew Brettler. One of the passages he was concerned about says the first parties were Virginia Giuffre's team, and second parties, that was Jeffrey Epstein's team, agree that the terms of this settlement agreement are not intended to be used by any other person nor be admissible in any proceeding or case against or involving Jeffrey Epstein, either civil or criminal. Now, what did that mean? I have to say, I thought it meant that the document couldn't be used in any civil or criminal proceedings that might be brought against Epstein. But the judge seemed to think rather differently. He seemed to think, and he's the judge, that only Epstein and Giuffre could enforce the agreement, which means that Prince Andrew can't. And then the judge mentioned another passage in the agreement. He was asking questions of Giuffre's lawyer, David Boys, and that reads like this. It says, "Neither this settlement agreement nor any copy nor the terms shall be used or disclosed in any court, arbitration, or other legal proceedings except to enforce the provisions of this settlement agreement." And as far as the judge could see, this meant that the parties, Epstein and Giuffre, had intended that the agreement would be confidential. And if it was going to be confidential, well, how would somebody like Prince Andrew be able to even to hear about it, let alone rely on it? So in other words, the judge was not, as far as I can see, very persuaded by the arguments being put by Prince Andrew's lawyers that this agreement protected him from the claim being brought against him.
Do you think there's a bigger problem here for the prince, in that he's the son of the Queen? There was a case, whatever it was now, a couple of decades back, with the rapper Snoop Dogg. It was a murder case, and he got off on a technicality. And you can argue that, like rappers, it's okay to get off on a technicality. But if it's the Duke of York being perceived to have gotten off on a technicality, doesn't that mean in the broader scheme of things he loses as well?
Well, the first point to make is, of course, this isn't a criminal case. This is a civil claim against the prince. Secondly, you can certainly say it's unattractive to rely on an agreement which cost Epstein $500,000, when you, the prince, haven't contributed any money to it and weren't perhaps even aware of it originally, certainly weren't involved in it. On the other hand, if you have lawyers, they are there to put all arguments that can properly be put. And if they say that this worked for Alan Dershowitz, which is what they're saying, if they say that it was intended to protect associates of Jeffrey Epstein, and Prince Andrew was a friend of his, from further legal action, because after all, Virginia Giuffre has already got damages, $500,000, and she's seeking damages now. Well, if that's the argument, it seems reasonable to put it. Whether or not it works is what we're going to wait to see when we hear from the judge.
Do you think, just a quick final question, Joshua, do you think we're ever going to see His Royal Highness in the witness box in New York? Or is that just not going to happen?
It's a civil case, and all civil cases can be settled if the parties can reach a deal. After all, we're talking about an agreement to settle a claim brought against Epstein by Giuffre in 2009. So I think this is to some extent shadow boxing by the two sides. They're lining up, they're assessing the strengths and weaknesses of each other's sides, and I suspect there will be a great deal of pressure on Prince Andrew to settle this case in whatever way he can.
Well, that's fascinating, Joshua. As you know, even in civil cases, once these things start, you never quite know what plot twists are gonna come up. But that was terrific analysis, and we appreciate it. Joshua Rosenberg, QC. Prince Andrew isn't the only member of the royal family having a bad week. Harry and Meghan, oh, no, wait, I don't think we can call them members of the royal family still. They tried to trade off their name and status with some pseudo charity called Archewell, named after their son. He's an earl, but they don't want to give him the earldom. It started with a big splash in 2020, and it raised just wait for this. It raised $50,000, $50,000, right? $50,000. Most American charities could make that just by setting up a trestle table to sell tickets for some gala, but not the Sussexes. This is so heartening to me. This is our feel-good story of the day. They've been on Oprah. They've been fawned over by all these Hollywood types. And yet they can't raise more than 50 grand for their lousy pseudo charity. And in fact, they've spent more in legal fees trying to dissolve their previous failed charity, Sussex Royal. So this is great. That's our heartwarming story of the day. Harry and Meghan's charity is a flop. Warner Brothers Music has bought David Bowie's catalogue for a record sum for any British songwriter or music star, $250 million American dollars. It covers 6 decades worth of David Bowie's music. But I wonder, does David Bowie's songbook include his original English lyric to the Frank Sinatra song My Way? It was David Bowie who wrote the first rejected English lyric for that song, which I happen to have heard from Mr. Bowie. He would have been 75 this weekend, but $250 million is a pretty impressive sum. There's a lot of talk lately about mask, no mask, all that. The Taliban have just cut to the chase and come up with an easy solution. They just take your head off completely. That way you don't have to wear a mask. You got the burqa, which covers the rest of it. This is a pilot program, because they're like new Taliban, they're like Tony Blair's New Labour. These guys are new Taliban, and they have ordered clothing shops in Kabul to behead their mannequins, because they say showing them with a head makes them sinful idols. If you've ever been past the fancier ladies' wear stores, you'll know that in the United Kingdom you often see mannequins with no heads, and they're wearing the finest of dresses. In fact, there used to be so many a couple of decades back. I got quite into the idea of a a headless woman wearing haute couture. Well, now you can just go to your local store in Kabul to see that. The latest move from the new Taliban. If it works on mannequins, they're going to extend it to flesh and blood people. Okay, and what do we have finally for you? Oh, yeah. They were going, oh yeah, here we are. Have you ever longed for the simpler life of North Korea? One defector has. A North Korean man in his 30s snuck across the demilitarized zone and defected to South Korea about a year ago. But he found he wasn't able to make a go of it, finally financially working as a cleaner. So on Saturday, he snuck back, he redefected back into North Korea. He's one of 30 known double defectors in the last decade who've crossed to the south and then back to the north. Maybe he's the guy we should hire to welcome people on the southern shore there. That's pretty amazing considering North Korea's entire economy is basically unreliable nukes and knockoff Viagra. But he evidently felt that instead of the bustling, dynamic South Korean economy, he'd rather make knockoff Viagra and unreliable nukes back in North Korea. Speaking of which, North Korea's great patron, China. They run not just North Korea, but plenty of stuff over here. So they're the people who know what we're in for and where we're headed this year. That's coming up next on GB News. Stick with us.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight, is there any hope of saving Brits from a cost of living crisis? Tory MP Craig McKinlay, who's piling the pressure on Boris, will sit down with me. Plus, GB News stars Nigel Farage and Darren Grimes will be sounding off on issues that matter to you. I'll also crown a new Greatest Britain and Union Jackass and break down the day's top headlines with my superstar panel. The Conservative commentator Calvin Robinson, the Daily Star columnist Dawn Neeson, and the author and journalist Rebecca Reed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. Email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. That's gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. China is denying claims by US officials that it is expanding its nuclear arsenal. Fu Kong, the Director General of the Chinese Politburo's Arms Control Department, says it's untrue that China is, quote, expanding dramatically its collection of nukes. Not at all. Don't you believe a word of that. China is simply, quote, modernizing its nuclear forces. Ironically, there was supposed to be a UN disarmament conference this week, but that's been postponed because of the COVID, which has proved to be a far more effective Chinese weapon against the West than the biggest nuclear arsenal is. Here now is Bruno Massé, former Portuguese Secretary of State for European Affairs and author of the book Geopolitics for the End Time. Bruno, you know quite a bit about Chinese influence and power in Portugal, because not so many years ago, they mysteriously became, I think, the biggest investor in your electricity grid. And that is something that if you had gone back to your grandfathers, if you'd gone back to the Portuguese political class of a century ago, when admittedly it was a rather turbulent time in Portugal, but if you had said to those Portuguese politicians from the day before yesterday, China is going to be the critical investor in Portuguese electricity, they would have thought you were bonkers. Yet somehow this has all managed to happen. Is there still time to stop China's advance on the world?
Hi, Mark. Great to be on the show. I was chuckling earlier with the news. It's funny reporting there. Well, I was in the government when we made that decision. So I should also be held responsible for it. The mood was very different back then, I have to realize. In fact, we were getting pressure from Brussels to strike the deal with the Chinese company. My time in government, I didn't see any pressure from Chinese authorities. I don't know if that's changed. I've been out of government for 6 years. But certainly now the mood would have been very different and probably would have gotten pressure from Brussels not to strike a deal for our electricity network. It's happening all over Europe. It's happening in the UK. You remember very well, David Cameron, when I went to those meetings in Brussels, the Cameron government was pushing for a trade deal with China, was pushing for a golden age of relations between the UK and China, between the EU and China. So everything has changed in the last few years, I think for the better. We've become more realistic. My books on China were actually sort of call to arms in a way, calling attention that this was not a country that we could neglect. This was not a country that we could underestimate. This was not a country that was becoming liberal and democratic. This was going to become a pillar of the world economy, threatening to overcome the United States in significant respects, but never converging with a liberal democratic model. And I think this is now actually the majority view, but it wasn't 6, 7, 8 years ago.
Do you think the Americans get that? I mean, even this complaint, which may well be true about Chinese militarization, they're increasing their nukes. They now have the largest surface fleet in the world. They've got hypersonic weapons, or space nukes in the common parlance. But as a practical matter, they seem to basically have just taken over the world without firing a single shot. Wherever you go in Africa, there are huge numbers of Chinese persons working all over the place. As far as Her Majesty's dominions are concerned, they're buying up the Commonwealth country by country. Basically, they're doing it all without weapons. They're doing it in a much subtler, under the radar kind of way.
Absolutely. That's my view as well. I mean, if you look at those maps of who is the main trade partner of every country in the world, and you realize that China is the main trade partner of about 2/3, 70% of countries in the world, and the US is relegated to a rather marginal position, perhaps being a dominant trade actor in the Caribbean or in Latin America, and that's about it. And China's taken over global trade, taken over many value chains, taken over many critical technological innovations. And I think that is critical for China. When they talk about the nuclear arms race, I think they essentially want to rival the United States, make sure that they're not vulnerable to U.S., as they see it, U.S. nuclear blackmail, so that they can win the game on other chessboards, which are essentially trade, technology, but also political influence. I mean, it's not just about economics, it's also about political influence. They are cultivating political elites all over the world. They are cultivating even intellectual elites all over the world. And you see suddenly how, for example, when there's a question about signing a letter about Xinjiang, it's usually said China has no allies. And, it's true to some extent. Only Pakistan is a formal ally. But they can get 40, 50 countries to sign anything they ask. It's not the China of old. It's a China that is at the center of the global economy, the center of world politics as well.
Well, the treatment of the Uyghurs is very interesting because the Organization for Islamic Cooperation at the UN, which I think represents 58 different nations, and they go bananas if there's any perceived quote-unquote Islamophobia from a Canadian Prime Minister or a New Zealand Trade Minister or whatever, but they're completely silent about genocide against the Uyghurs. I wanted to ask you, while we're talking about that though, Lithuania, in recent weeks, there was a sort of plucky little Lithuania standing up to China because Taiwan had opened up an office there under a name that the Chinese objected to. And they talked a tough game for a few days, but the Prime Minister of Lithuania appears to have totally backed down on that. Is that just the way we should get used to these things going now?
I guess so. I think it was the president, not the prime minister, but there's already deep division in Lithuania between the president and the prime minister on this. I mean, as far as I understand, talking to people, what happened was Lithuania felt very safe to take these principle, values-based decisions because it has a tiny trade with China. But then China used a weapon that I think it was easy to see coming, which is simply to use the indirect trade links that a German company that sources supplies in Lithuania would now be discriminated by Chinese authorities, thereby putting pressure on the German company not to do business in Lithuania. I don't think the Lithuanian authorities were exactly aware of this, but it's in a sense it's a learning moment for everyone to realize that Chinese influence extends much further than you might think at first. Even if you feel you're entirely protected or invulnerable to those measures, you'll find out that you're not. I think that's the lesson, and that's, I think, what explains this reaction in Lithuania today by the president.
Is that the weak link in the chain? I think we heard the chief executive of Siemens, the German company, just in the last couple of days, taking a fairly relaxed view to what China is doing to the Uyghurs, for example. Is it Western corporations that have made us so vulnerable to these kinds of things?
Yes, it is. And I think it's even worse than that because, my day job is in consulting. I talk to lots of companies about China. And what's been happening in the last 2-3 years that is very interesting, but also concerning, is that some companies are starting to have a sort of an identity crisis. They no longer know very well if they are European or American companies or Chinese companies. Because think about it, if a company like Volkswagen, for example, that I don't work with, if Volkswagen exports more than half its car sales to China, more than half its sales revenue comes from China. Is this a German company, or is it in a way already becoming a Chinese company? And then after that, of course, when it comes to human resources, lots of people in critical parts of the company are Chinese. They have to be if you're selling half your exports to China. Yeah. So this is happening all over the place. And you even hear from Chinese officials, Chinese intellectuals that give us another 10, 15 years and many of our companies will be our company.
Right. That's actually a brilliant way of looking at it, Bruno. Is Volkswagen already a Chinese company? Are the Hollywood studios already Chinese movie studios? You can go down the list. Thank you very much for that, Bruno. We appreciate your insight, and we hope you'll come back and talk to us again. Thank you very much. Let's close out with some of your questions before we end things for this evening. Anne on GB View asks, do you think that some of the migrant crisis could be alleviated if Europe closed its borders? Well, in theory, there's a global pandemic going on, so all the borders are supposed to be closed. But funnily enough, that only applies to you if you want to spend a week on a Mediterranean beach. But if you want to spend the rest of your life on the English beach, it doesn't apply. John says on GB Views, why do you keep talking about people smugglers all the time when we all know, including Nigel Farage, that these small boats are being escorted out from the French coast by the French Navy? If there were people smugglers involved in this, then why are the French not arresting them instead of just escorting them out? That's the point I made with respect, John, to the UK Border Patrol and the Royal National Lifeboat Institute as well, that these people, it's a criminal enterprise. And the French Navy and the UK Border Patrol and the Royal National Lifeboat Institute are in effect in league with the criminal enterprise of the people smuggler. One more. Keith on GB Views says, I marked our relatives over a lot of generations, but I've now stopped my donations due to the RNLI acting as an illegal ferry and at the same time not being available to carry out life-saving around our coast. That's true. This is not why people give money to the RNLI, which, as I said, has a glorious 2-century history of fine work around the British Isles. That will do it for us. Dan Wootton is... I'm so privileged to be Dan Wootton's warm-up act. I absolutely love it. I will be back here tomorrow, 8 o'clock, so I'll see you then. Stay safe, stay free.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. Tonight, keep anxious and carry on. That was the message of today's latest briefing as Boris locked in Plan BS. But is a reduction in the isolation period to 5 days the only way to save schools, shops, and our sanity? I'll explore in my digest before I hear the thoughts of my superstar panel, the Daily Star columnist Dawn Neeson, the Conservative commentator Calvin Robinson, and the author and journalist Rebecca Reid. As the first migrants of 2022 land in Kent, are we on for another record year of crossings? GB News star Nigel Farage joins me on that at 9:30. Should the Queen strip Prince Andrew of his military titles? Former Beeb Royal editor Jenny Bond goes head-to-head with TV personality and former SAS trooper Phil Campion in the clash, and I'll get your verdict as well. Is Sadiq Khan, London's failed mayor, really about to decriminalise drugs? Political firebrand Anne Widdecombe takes aim at his maddening pilot scheme in Uncancelled. Should the PM scrap green levies to save Brits from a cost of living crisis? Oh yes, he should. Tory MP and chair of the Net Zero Scrutiny Group, Craig McKinlay, who's been piling the pressure on the PM, sits down with me at 10:20. This was a really disturbing one, actually, as more than 400 churches close in less than a decade. Is Britain turning its back on religion? GB News star Darren Grimes, who found God thanks to Twitter, explores this national crisis of faith in The Outsider at 9:45. Plus, is Prince Charles wrong to call for a warlike footing against climate change in his latest woke outburst? And should we reject an never-ending cycle of COVID boosters? The chairman of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation thinks so, but what about my panel? I'll tackle those headlines and more in the Media Buzz. Plus, we'll bring you a first look at tomorrow's newspapers as always, and just before the end of the show, crown another Greatest Britain and Union Jackass. This is Dan Wootton Tonight. Let's go. Just one thing first, though. I don't care if judges throw out Virginia Giuffre's case against Prince Andrew. The public has lost faith in the disgraced Duke, and he, I think, is losing this battle. The time has come for Prince Charles and William to convince the Queen to strip disgraced Andy of all his military titles and banish him from Windsor and public life forevermore. Every day this PR calamity goes on, he is bringing shame on his family. And as I've said for months, if he has nothing to hide, then just go to New York, cooperate with the FBI and the American authorities to end this thing once and for all. Getting off on a potential legal technicality because of a £500,000 payoff his pedo pal Jeffrey Epstein negotiated with Virginia isn't winning in any way. In fact, I'd go as far to say it's guaranteeing the total loss of his reputation with his subjects, which is surely what matters. We'll debate that in the clash shortly. But first, my reaction to today's number 10 briefing of doom with my superstar panel. Let's get a first look at them in 2022.
It's the former Daily Star editor, Dawn Neeson. There she is. The Conservative commentator, Calvin Robinson, and the author and journalist, Rebecca Reid. They're going to take me on in just a couple of minutes. First, though, the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Dan, thank you. Good evening. The Prime Minister has said over 60% of people in intensive care with COVID are unvaccinated. During a Downing Street briefing earlier on today, Boris Johnson also confirmed that the government will roll out daily COVID testing for 100,000 critical workers. That comes as today's reported cases of COVID have exceeded 200,000 for the first time. Despite the high case numbers, Boris Johnson has not announced any new restrictions.
Anyone who thinks our battle with